Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rick Heenahan on Common Sense HD, and I just want to remind you about the website, commonsensehd.com. And I know you enjoy it because there's almost today or tomorrow we'll be at 25,000 counted visits, and I believe somewhere over 30,000 otherwise. Because like this morning I had 33 visitors, but no counting, so somebody was referring them. And the other thing is just to continue watching, and we have a bunch of new shows, and I think you'll enjoy them. And today we have a show that is very interesting, very special, and I think you'll enjoy it very much. Hopefully, I'm using very a lot today, and this because it's a very fine show. The show is Bread and Roses, about the festival in Lawrence and the Women's Union movement. And I hope you enjoy it very much. And today's guest is Jim. It's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Rick.
And so could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. I work at Lawrence Heritage State Park as the Visitor Services Supervisor, which means that I'm responsible for the tours and the education programs. I was born and raised in Lawrence, so I'm, sharing the history of my hometown. The park where I work is a small historical museum in our visitor center, as well as some green space in Lawrence. The park is the major partner of the Bread and Roses Heritage Committee, which is a separate nonprofit organization which runs the festival and has done so for, well, this will be the 29th annual festival.
Wow. So can you tell us a little bit about what Bread and Roses means? We were talking a little bit about that before.
Sure, happy to. It's quite a story. Of course, our festival is named for a strike that took place in Lawrence in 1912 of the textile workers. Lawrence, of course, was a major textile producing center. It was a planned industrial city for the purpose of being a textile city, following the model of Lowell, which is a little bit older. Come the early 20th century, the workforce is dominated by immigrants, particularly new immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, Italians, Poles, Lebanese, Lithuanians, etc. With the beginning of the year of 1912, a new law reduced the hours for women and children only, mind you, from 56 to 54 hours a week, but everyone's hours were cut back because their work was so interdependent. When they got their first paychecks, they found their pay was cut accordingly, and these folks were barely surviving as it was. So the strike began fairly spontaneously, went on for 9 weeks in a harsh, cold winter with some really brutal conditions and some really amazing dramatic episodes we can get into. Of course, the role of women was one of the things that the strike was famous for. They took a very public and upfront part in the demonstrating and the marching and so on. And finally, amazingly, the strikers won their demands for not just restoring the pay cut, but actually a pay increase and changes in working conditions. So this is one of the major events in American labor history. If you wanted to do a top 5 or a top 10 or even a top 5 of famous strikes and events in labor history, the Bread and Roses strike would definitely be one of them. So we've been commemorating it for 29 years now with the festival, which is interesting because for a number of years the strike was actually a suppressed memory in Lawrence for the first 6.5 decades after the strike, because of the radical union that was in charge and because it was conducted by so many of these new foreign immigrants, considered foreigner at the time. So the strike was a suppressed memory locally for, as I say, 60 plus years, and then finally around late 70s, early 80s, the story was unearthed. Again, a number of factors came into play to do that, and folks began to realize that this is a story that we can celebrate and take pride in. The workers, again, new immigrants, very poor, most didn't speak English yet, and somehow managed to work together under terrible odds and very strong opposition from the mill owners and the government and so on, managed to win, which improved pay and working conditions, not just for them, but for mill workers all over New England, and of course contributed to the movement for better pay and working conditions for workers everywhere. It famously brought attention to the issue of child labor, which was, of course, an issue in the mills in Lawrence at the time. So finally, from the 1980s on, the strike has been something that folks in Lawrence have celebrated and said, hey, our ancestors did something pretty special. They,
Right.
under great odds or against great odds, they exhibited tremendous courage and sacrifice to win that victory. So it's something we've been celebrating with the festival on Labor Day. Appropriately, we're about the only people who celebrate the real meaning of Labor Day on Labor Day for 29 years now, and it's a great time, and there's a lot there for people to enjoy.
So who are some of the show guests for the festival, or festival guests?
Well, performers, now we have 3 stages going simultaneously through the afternoon with performers of various kinds, ethnic and folk and dance and so on. This year's headliner is Marcia Ball, who's a pretty well-known Grammy-winning practitioner of Southern boogie-woogie, blues, and R&B. She's a real lively presence on stage, piano-pounding boogie-woogie player. She's been a big hit in Lowell, where she's performed at Boarding House Park and at the Lowell Folk Fest a number of times. It draws huge crowds, and we think she'll do the same for us. We've got a Latino Caribbean band named Ten Tumbao, Emma's Revolution, which is a folk duo that does a lot of songs with kind of social justice meaning behind them. A big jazz band called Itchy Feet, and we're starting it off with a Japanese taiko drumming group called Odaiko New England, which I believe is based around this area. I want to say Wakefield. And that's just the main stage. There's 2 other stages
Oh, wow.
going
Wow,
as well.
so that's fantastic. So how long, what are the hours of the festival?
Starts at 12. We actually have the Japanese drumming group starting at 11:45 because when they're pounding the drums, that's going to wake up the whole town and
Right.
tell them that there's something doing on the common and to come on out. But the 3 stages start basically at noon and run continuously until 4 o'clock or so. Entertainment continues. The 2nd and 3rd stages shut down at 4 o'clock, and we focus on the 2 final acts, one of which is the Bread and Puppet Theater, which is a fascinating group. They do very kind of politically oriented, but very humorous and very lively puppet theater show. It's hard to describe. For the first hour from 4 to 5, and then we'll bring on Marcia Ball on the main stage as the finale from 5 to 6 o'clock.
Oh, that's good. So it's a family time with those
Absolutely.
hours.
You know, yeah, you can get home in time for, you know, starting school the day after Labor Day, because so many are starting before Labor Day now.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's through the afternoon and, you know, just until 6 o'clock, so people have time to get home. And we do draw people from all over. People have come from all over Eastern Mass and Maine and New Hampshire and so on. We've been at it for 29 years. We have people that come back every year. They don't even necessarily care to find out who's performing. They just know it's going to be a good time, and they show up every year for the festival.
And so where's it located?
It's on the Common in downtown Lawrence. It's called the Campagnone Common, which is named after 3 Italian-American Lawrence brothers who were actually killed during World War II.
Oh, wow.
So we want to recognize that. But the Common is this very nice park in the center of Lawrence. It was part of the original planned city by the founders who
When you say Plan City, what do you mean?
well, the founders of Lawrence were some rich Yankee merchant industrialists, some of the same people that founded Lowell, and they really planned the city because there was nothing there up until 1845 but farms and meadows and about 100 people. So they bought the land They got the rights to put a dam across the river for water power for the textile mills. And they really planned the city, you know, laid out the streets on a map and said this is where this is going to be and so on. And in the course of that, designated 17 acres right in the heart of downtown as a common for the people to have a green space to enjoy. And that's a great location for the festival.
Yeah.
It is also, I must add, historically significant because a lot of the notable events in the strike, particularly the mass meetings and speeches that were held during the strike, took place on that common.
Okay.
So we're celebrating on the spot where a lot of those events actually happened.
And so, what other types of things will be there? Will people be bringing in food and whatnot?
There's a bunch of other things besides the performances on the stages. There are food vendors, particularly ethnic food vendors are what we emphasize and try to attract because part of our mission in the festival is to commemorate Lawrence's diversity, diverse cultures, both historically at the time of the strike and the present day. So we try to represent that as much as possible.
What are the cultures represented in Lawrence right now?
Right now, Lawrence is a majority Latino, and the largest group of which is Dominicans, but there are several others as well, Puerto Ricans and Guatemalans, etc. We have a Southeast Asian population. We have some recent immigrants from Africa and the Middle East.
Oh, wow.
So Lawrence, a long time ago, I don't know when, was nicknamed the Immigrant City, and it's still true today. Of course, at the time of the strike, Lawrence was about as diverse and cosmopolitan as any place in the United States. There were something like 40 nationalities in Lawrence, speaking 20 plus different languages.
Wow.
We had grown incredibly rapidly in the 20 years leading up to the strike because of the growth of the mills, and that attracted new immigrants who were coming to America at the time, which of course is the time that so many immigrants were coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, famously processed through Ellis Island in New York in many cases. But then, you know, they would look for work and might hear about Lawrence or might already have relatives who were in Lawrence and said, come and join us here. We'll find a job in the mills because they're growing like crazy. Unfortunately, at that point, the living and working conditions were, by some measures, getting worse, though, for these new immigrants. The jobs in the mills were being de-skilled to some extent. We're implementing newer machinery that required less skill.
Funny to think of you talking about the, you know, sort of the de-skilling of the workforce and the advancements of technology, and we would look at that technology and say, "Oh my God!"
Well,
but the same thing's happening now. Several of the guests were focused on workforce development, and what they're looking at is a 2-year degree. They're looking. That's where Massachusetts is has the vacuum for employment. Is that 2-year degree? That's a tech degree.
Yeah. And certainly, you know, skill level plays a role in the job opportunities available to an individual and to their bargaining power at the workplace. And with the new technologies in the mills, the newer immigrants' jobs were generally low skilled and therefore low paid, you know, averaging like $8 a week. In those days, although prices were lower, but still people were barely surviving, which of course is why so many of them had their kids working in the mills, oftentimes underage. Legally it was 14, but the enforcement was very weak,
yeah.
so many kids worked in the mills younger than that. And there were no safety precautions, so there were any number of injuries taking place in the mills, you know, on top of the low pay and the no benefits. So times were pretty tough, and that, of course, is why they organized. And there are not much dissimilar things happening to a lot of immigrant workers today who now, because manufacturing is mostly left the